Joining me now is Representative Ted Lieu of California. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. And let's start with this piece on the front page of the New York Times today, indicating that what these personal attorneys for the president want is evidence, and they want to know that the president's testimony is essential. How do you react to that piece, Congressman?
Thank you, David, for your question. The demands by the president's lawyers are utterly ridiculous. I'm a former prosecutor, and I know that prosecutors don't give their entire case to the defendant before they interview the person. And in this case, there could be information or witnesses that the president knows about that Robert Mueller absolutely has a right to ask him about. Just because the president is a president doesn't mean he's above the law, and Special Counsel Mueller absolutely has a right to ask the president what he knows about potential criminal misconduct.
We have seen a change in tack here over the last few months, going back to April. Rudy Giuliani now leading up this president's legal team, and we've seen those lawyers casting aspersions on the process, on Special Counsel Robert Mueller, on the House's investigation and the Senate's investigation. How do you react to that, this information game that they're trying to play?
As every prosecutor knows, when you don't have the facts or the evidence, what happens is the defendants attack law enforcement. They attack their process. And that's what you see the White House lawyers doing, because they know that the facts and evidence look pretty bad against, if not the president, at least the president's associates.
There's that big New York Times piece. There's an AP piece as well, making some waves. That centers on a memo that Mark Kasowitz, who is one of the president's attorneys, wrote, centering on James Comey, the former FBI director. This is a memo that dates back to June the 27th, 2017. A memo here in which James Comey is referred to as Machiavellian. His conduct is called into question. Let me ask you about this particular facet of that campaign I mentioned just a moment ago. How they're targeting James Comey, who one would assume here is an integral part of Robert Mueller's investigation.
If you look at what James Comey did, people who are Republicans or Democrats could disagree, but no one really challenges James Comey's integrity. I disagree with what James Comey did in terms of judgment calls, but there's no evidence that he lied or that he perjured himself. And I think, again, they're attacking law enforcement. They're trying to attack people, and that's because the evidence and facts do not look good for Trump campaign associates and potentially the president.
Congressman, you mentioned you're a former prosecutor. I want to get your sense of timing here. In that piece in the New York Times, there's a reference to whether or not Robert Mueller might subpoena the president, try to compel him to testify. There's an indication as well that the president's legal team is concerned that this is taking far too long. What is your sense of the timing of all of this and the potential need here for a subpoena of the U.S. president?
The Whitewater investigation by Ken Starr took 4 years. The Benghazi investigation by Republicans in Congress took 2.5 years. Robert Mueller is moving quite quickly. He's secured numerous indictments and guilty pleas. So I don't know where these calls are saying that his investigation is taking too long. He's actually proceeding faster than any other investigation against a sitting president. And then in terms of timing, I know Robert Mueller is very aware of what James Comey did and how he messed up Hillary Clinton's campaign by revealing information just a few weeks before the elections. I don't think Robert Mueller is going to do that. He's very aware there are elections coming up.
Let me just pivot here to talk about the resignation of now former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt after a long list of scandals, beginning with those travel expenses, getting into security, the motorcade with sirens and lights that he used to get to restaurants in Washington, D.C., the condo that he was renting that was owned by a lobbyist, numerous violations of lobbying laws. 15 investigations continue on Capitol Hill. Your reaction to his decision to step down these 16 months after he took the job?
Scott Pruitt was a national embarrassment who likely committed multiple criminal felonies. I'm glad he was gone, but he should have been fired a long time ago. And he's just one example of the Trump administration's cabinet of corruption. We now have Wilbur Ross, who has been accused of insider trading. You've got Ryan Zinke, who used taxpayer funds to spend $139,000 on office doors, and then Ben Carson, who spent $31,000 to get a dining table before he was forced to reverse that after the Free Press reported about it.
What can you tell us about Andrew Wheeler? His successor, at least on an interim basis, is being described as a creature of the swamp that is Washington, D.C., a Washington insider, somebody who knows the halls of Congress well. Is he somebody that you met, somebody you're familiar with? What can you tell us about how he might lead the Environmental Protection Agency?
I have not personally met him. I'm happy to give him a chance to show what he can do at the EPA. I do know that he was a former coal lobbyist, and he's going to be very aware that coal is not coming back.
Do you think that it's going to be a radically different agency under his leadership? He demurred when he was asked whether or not he would take the job permanently. He said, I haven't been offered that. I'm going to do this on an interim basis. Would you be satisfied with him leading it when you look at who else might be in charge of the organization?
I think we should give him a chance to show what his views and policies are. I don't think we should prejudge what he's going to do, but he does come from the coal industry, and he certainly does not have views, as I think, that would be good, but we should still give him a chance.
There was a moment a few weeks ago when the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen sat down at a Mexican restaurant on 14th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. for a meal, and some protesters headed to her table to make their concerns with her leadership known. Let's take a hear at what happened there inside that Mexican restaurant.
Shame! 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 Shame!
Homeland Security. You're among the Democrats, Congressman, who've called for her to step down from that position. In light of what happened with Scott Pruitt, his decision to step down, are you any more confident that's going to happen? Do you have any more confidence in her leadership in light of what we've seen here over the last few weeks?
I have no confidence in Secretary Nielsen's leadership. That's why I've called for her to resign. Not only did she lie to the American people, saying that no family separation policy existed, but she is grossly incompetent. They never had a plan to reunify families. As we sit here today, there's between 2,000 to 3,000 babies and kids who have been ripped away from their parents with no real plans to reunify them. The American Pediatric Association has said that this kind of trauma can affect their brain development. So we're causing harm to actual kids. She has to go.
I'll ask you lastly on that issue. You represent a district in California. We've seen this play out acutely on the U.S.-Mexico border. Of course, Canada shares a border with Mexico. We'll be focused on that district court in California come Monday when it decides whether or not to grant the federal government more time to reunite these kids. What's your reaction to what we've learned over the course of this week? How many more children than we thought have been separated from their parents? The fact that the federal government is going to use DNA testing to try to reunite those children with their parents. What does that tell you about this federal government's grip on this crisis?
It shows that not only do we have an evil policy, we had gross incompetence, and that makes for a very, very bad mixture of kids who have been traumatized. And we also know that there are now kids who have parents that have already been deported, and how do you track those people down? And then you have kids who cannot identify the parents, and with every passing week, this looks more and more like the functional equivalent of kidnapping by the federal government in our name, and that is reprehensible and horrific.
All right, the gentleman from the 33rd District in California, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu. Ted, thank you.